Hello, I'm A1Base. I've been asked by Xbox Era to take a look at Microsoft's latest Gears of War release, only this time it's a turn-based one. Gears Tactics is a squad-based game where you control individual gears taken from 5 generic classes from a top-down perspective in a turn-based environment. All of your classic Gears enemies will show up, and you'll have to maneuver your small squad of gears to complete the mission while moving towards the overall goal of killing a single protagonist through a linear series of story missions. Completing missions gives gear modifiers and experience points, which can then be spent on a frankly overwhelmingly detailed skill tree for each class of soldier, which further specialises and differentiates them as you progress through the campaign. Human nature being what it is, it's almost impossible to describe something without doing so in relation to another existing entity. Utilising comparisons, however unfair, gives us, the writer and reader, a common point of reference to base our experience around. And in this case, the obvious comparison would be the paragon of turn-based strategy games, XCOM, so that's where we'll start. The first and most glaring difference in the two games is how each handles the strategy part of the game. In XCOM, you have a strategy layer, where you manage your bases, troops, research, manufacturing, and overall plan to achieve the game objectives in your own way before heading into the tactical turn-based layer. Gears quite literally hits the del key and does away with that in its entirety. To be clear here, there is no strategy element in Gears Tactics, hence the name, which is why I've been so confused and frustrated that other early reviews have been holding this up as a superlative strategy game. I'll be generous and assume that some others don't understand the difference between strategy and tactics rather than my usual cynical self, so let's clear that up now because it is important to set expectations. Tactics are the means used on a small scale to complete an interim objective, the moves you make in the battlescape or the gear and soldiers you take. Strategy is the overall complex campaign plan that governs how tactical decisions are made. In gameplay, a strategic game would have you deciding how to achieve the endgame objective and how to obtain resources and recruits. The tactical element is made once a mission is selected. It took me a while to understand this, coming from a 25-year-long XCOM background. Gears Tactics is not a turn-based strategy game, and it's not selling itself as one. It's a turn-based tactical game, and if you remember that, you'll be less jarred by the differences in our comparison. Whether that's an improvement or not depends entirely on what you enjoy, but the lack of a strategy layer means that Gears is very much a curated and linear experience. The second difference is how the game handles the abilities and equipment of your squad, and in a large part it's these differences that define the feel of the tactical layer of each game. In XCOM, powerful abilities or equipment are given a limited number of uses in each mission, causing the player to deliberate on the best time to use them. Take in a grenade and you typically get one use of it in a mission. This inevitably leads to a considered approach to combat and a slower paced tactical layer, where optimization of your limited resources is critical. Gears Tactics has obviously made a deliberate effort to turn this convention on its head and make the battlescape a fast-paced and brutal affair, appropriately in keeping with the feel of games in the series. Abilities and equipment in Gears are on a turn-based cooldown system, meaning that, for example, in an infinitely long mission you could throw an infinite number of grenades or use special abilities an infinite number of times. When you combine this difference with squad member upgrades that reduce those cooldown times for the abilities and equipment based on specific squad member actions, such as using a chainsaw or getting a long-range kill, it's a recipe for using those powerful abilities as much as possible while making them available as often as you can. This difference in approach to the pacing of the battlescape is probably the most significant fundamental difference Gears Tactics has to other games in the genre, and I found myself enjoying the change of pace. The final significant game-altering mechanic is how Gears Tactics deals with the distribution of enemies on a map, or pods as they're known. When a mission loads in, XCOM populates the map with a specific number of pods, each having a specific number and type of enemies in it. These pods roam the map within limits and have specific trigger distances when they'll engage your troops. The key tactical skill to beating XCOM is management of your unit positions to ensure you'll only ever engage one pod at a time. There's always a risk if you try a flanking run that you'll trigger a second pod that was hidden in the fog of war and all of a sudden you're overwhelmed. Once again, this approach necessitates a very slow, considered approach to tactical combat, particularly at higher difficulty levels. Gears, on the other hand, shows you exactly where enemy groups are when they spawn in. On hostage rescue missions, you see enemy units crouching around your objective before you ever get near, and when pods spawn, they're either dropped from giant flying beasties or crawl up from emergence holes. Now this has two major effects on gameplay. First, you're never ever going to be surprised by the appearance of an enemy. And second, you always have the ability to confidently make long flanking runs without getting into too much trouble. Once again, these fundamental changes are either a good or bad thing depending entirely on what you enjoy. Personally, I like the tactical difficulty of trying to engage enemy pods without getting surprised by a second or third. And the likely personnel losses that come with that particular mistake are, I think, one of the defining characteristics of the XCOM series. Pushing too hard has a drastic and often game-ending consequence. While I found the ability to move as I wanted to in Gears Tactics very liberating, that, when combined with the complete knowledge of enemy positions, made the tactical game extremely easy and, for me, less enjoyable. That last point brings us nicely to another discussion point. Without save scumming, where you quick save a game before a turn and reload it if you get a poor result when you take it, it's almost inevitable you'll lose troops in more traditional turn-based strategy games like XCOM. The loss of a high-ranked squad member to a lucky RNG roll by the enemy can be crippling to a campaign, and while purists, or masochists maybe, like myself, will say that adds enjoyable tension and consequence to a game, I'm completely aware that others think it's deeply unfair and takes the fun out of it. Gears Tactics, however, goes too far in the other direction, making your troops almost indestructible. The ability of your squad members to tank fire and then either revive themselves or be picked up by a fellow squad member with only a minimal impact to their overall health pool for the remainder of that mission does synergize well with the faster, more free-flowing movement of tactics, but it also makes the game trivially easy. There are other, more subtle differences between XCOMs and Gears Tactics that can be discussed, but those four, in my opinion, are responsible for the largest differences in feel to how the tactical layer plays out. So far, what we talked about can be taken as either a positive or negative spin on traditional turn-based squad games, depending on your own preference, and that's as it should be. But unfortunately, there are some things about Gears Tactics that are simply bad. Almost game-breakingly so. The big elephant in the room is the squad management and gear selection mechanic, and the weapon modifiers. The reward for completing each mission is a number of equipment cases that contain randomly generated weapon modifiers. Additional cases can be found and collected in each tactical environment, and it won't be long until you're swimming in various percentage upgrades to fundamental skills like accuracy or critical damage. The problem is that each class has a unique weapon, and each unique weapon requires unique upgrades. You can't put a scope from a Lancer machine gun onto a retro Lancer machine gun, for example. Each weapon type has 4 modifier slots, and to alter each modifier slot, you have to be 4 levels deep in a submenu. And that's just the primary weapons. You can do the same for secondary weapons, grenades and armour, which further breaks down into helmets, chest pieces and legs. It's an utter shit show of micromanagement. You typically take out 4 squad members on a mission, and once you've expanded your roster, you're going to have multiple members of each class to pick from. At higher difficulties, taking the best equipment you have available is pretty important to be able to reliably deal large damage. So for every mission, for every member of your team, you have to drill down into their particular weapon, and from there into each of the 4 modifiers, and review and select what you want to take out. It takes a good 5 to 10 minutes each time, and only gets longer the more you play and the more modifiers you accumulate, because there's nothing to do with any surplus you have. You'll have dozens of 5% increases that you'll never use, but you have to scroll through them all because there isn't even a sort function. It's further complicated that you can't easily see who's carrying what modifiers and why. So while you might have 2 snipers on your roster, one might specialise in chaining together multiple shots and buffing the ability reload time of squad mates, while the other is a single shot high damage machine. Remembering which modifiers go with which of the myriad of different skills each unit in the same class has, without some form of matrix or spreadsheet, is tedious in the extreme, and is such a jarring change of pace from the fast and fluid combat that I'm absolutely serious when I say whoever designed this UI should have been fired for it. And whoever approved that UI should have been fired as well, preferably into the sun by a large cannon, because it's that awful and that out of place in this game. Perhaps we can hope for a patch that will include some improvements in the extremely near future. Other issues with the game include only a very limited number of mission types, and an extremely linear campaign with tiny tactical maps, which have a real shortage of verticality in them. The latter makes sense when you remember Gears Tactics is all about running up to your enemies and chainsawing them, but it still makes the tactical layer feel overly simplified. On the plus side, the inclusion of boss fights into the genre is a welcome addition, even if the execution of those fights again jars with the fast chaining mechanics that you'll be prioritising in every other mission type. The game's extremely pretty and runs nicely, and if you're into detailed customization of your characters, there's a huge selection of weapon and armor options. Is it a good game though? Will you, a reader I know nothing about, enjoy it? Well, that's the rub, isn't it? Gears Tactics is a really strange game to recommend because it seems so limited in who it's going to appeal to. If you enjoy the Gears of War franchise and the art design, then you're going to like this. It feels and looks like a Gears game. From the stupidly over-macho Gears themselves and their incessant grunting, to the continuous and gory chainsaw kills. If that's your thing and you'd like an easy entry into turn-based gameplay, then yeah, get this game, play it on an easy difficulty, and completely ignore the micromanagement needed through the weapon and squad modifier process. Like the Gears FPS games, it's a pretty, if brainless game. If, however, you're a fan of more complex turn-based strategy games, you're going to feel like a large portion of Gears Tactics is either missing or dumbed down so far that it feels completely unfinished. As a veteran of other games in the genre, at every moment this very much felt like baby's first turn-based tactics game. All it needs is for the instruction manual to be printed on thick cardboard with a disclaimer on the back saying, "These instructions are waterproof and chewable. Hoorah!"
How is that even possible?